we got to do this. It's part of our existence on a daily basis. Here you go. Not surprisingly, the SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey talked about the 16 members that are already in the SEC. Was asked, would there be more? He's never going to tell you whether there's going to be more or not. Really don't know that it's in his hands anymore. But this was going to be the topic of conversation, given that Texas and Oklahoma is now a part of the conference, and Florida State and Clemson remain basically at large in the eyes of many college football fans, given that they are suing the league that they're in and trying to get out from under the grant of rights deal. So Sankey had this to say about it. We're focused on our 16. I'm not a recruiter. My job is to make sure we meet the standard of excellence that we have for ourselves on a daily basis. That attracts interest. It's done that with the 2 universities that we've added this year. They're not the only phone calls I've ever had, but I'm not involved in recruitment. Well, that's a lie. You are, and you were, and certainly you would be again if you needed to be. You would do whatever it is that you thought would make the SEC stronger and would allow you to make more money. And by the way, that's your job. And I don't hate you for it. I hate what's happened to some extent to college football with realignment. And I do think you're a big part of the problem, Greg Sankey. But I don't blame you for going to war for the SEC, because I think you recognize the writing on the wall a lot sooner than the other conference commissioners, and then acted in your own self-interest, in the conference's self-interest, I should say, which is your job to do. And it's also not your fault that ESPN provides a platform for you to go on campaigns for schools within your league, uninterrupted, unadulterated, for an hour at a time while the nation watches. That's the advantage you have, and you take advantage of it, and I've got no problem with it. But, yeah, to say that you don't recruit teams, that is not something that you can say, I don't think, and believe, and be believed, I should say. But at the same time, he's never going to put himself in a situation to get sued. We all know that. And this is not rocket science. You'll have some journalists or those that are literalists who will say, see, we've told you all along. That league, Big Ten, they're not interested in Florida State or Clemson. And you guys have to be more adult than to listen to that and worry about it and roll your eyes. Just move on, because this is what's going to happen. It's fodder. It's a reason to kick things around and debate and argue about who's responsible for what's happened to college football. But I'm not surprised to hear Sankey answer in that way. I don't think it means anything.
It sounds like a head coach or a manager in a certain sport when free agency hits and they really want that top flight defensive end, or they really want that ace pitcher that can anchor their staff. But he's asked that question when free agency begins or the winter meetings begin and a signing has not occurred yet. And so what would Jacob deGrom, what would Paul Skeens mean to your rotation? Well, I've got to manage the guys that we have here on my roster. I love my guys. I love my clubhouse. Okay. So understand this. We can win with the guys that we have, and the guys that we have are enough. Now, if there's a signing, I'll talk about it at that point. That's what Sankey is doing right now on a much more administrative level as he's speaking. We all understand that. Well, many of us understand that, and those of us that don't, Get Up will do a segment about it tomorrow in which they said, well, Greg Sankey's had no discussions. He's had no discussions with Clemson or Florida State. They're not expanding at any point here, guys. They're just going to stay, because Greg told me that they're happy with 16.
There'll be one particular individual of the press that will say that for sure. It's amazing. It is amazing. I would say, too, this is an easy play for Sankey. I mean, you're going to get asked that. A lot of times these commissioners have to think of all the angles. They have to think of the creative ways in which they may be being asked in a veiled way to comment on certain things that they are, expressly told not to comment on. And this wouldn't be one of those, because this is as easy as it gets. This is the second you walk out to the dais, the very first question you're going to get, or something close to the first question you're going to get, is about Texas, Oklahoma, and will there be anybody else like Texas and Oklahoma? Even though you're going to get that. That's what you're going to get. And, you can't comment on that. You can't talk about whether or not there would be or wouldn't be. So it's really easy.
The funny thing is these guys still can't help themselves. Even in the quotes that you read, which are pretty bland and defensive.
Except for he kind of hints that he is paying attention to the fact,
and that hey, well, Texas and Oklahoma aren't the only phone calls I've received. They still can't help themselves. It's amazing. He could have shut it down and gone Bill Belichick and said, "We're on to week 1. Can't wait to hear about the 16 we have here, guys. We've got 2 new teams to focus on. Can't wait to welcome them up." Can you imagine that logo here a year ago, 2 years ago? It still doesn't feel real to me that we have this opportunity. No, well, they aren't the only phone calls I've got.
It's my favorite. He begins with very, very direct, assertive answer. I'm not a recruiter. So he's being asked about other teams. I'm not a recruiter. Now you can start there. You can, and pretty soon you can end this conversation. He talks about the standard of excellence, which draws and attracts interests. Okay, fair enough. Now from there, it did that with 2 universities that we've now added. They're not the only phone calls I've ever received. He did not need to do it, but I'm not involved in recruitment. He didn't need to do it.
It's not recruiting. It's not recruiting if they call me. Okay.
Well, also, he answers the question as to what he's telling you and why when he says, our presidents have been clear that I'm not going to entangle us in litigation around expansion. So it's like, hey, Greg, see if we can add Florida State and Clemson. Don't go getting us sued and being a dumbass about it, but see what we can do. That's all that is, that whole paragraph. Hey, Greg, I know we're not recruiting, but can we look at Florida State and Clemson maybe in the future? And don't get us sued, dumbass.
Right.
All right. Mission.
Now, and then they meet him. Now, we're going to meet in the bar. Well, we're going to meet at the Ritz, and we're going to speak loudly about how we're not expanding. And we're going to speak loudly, and I'm going to make sure they hear it in the back.
Yeah,
but, Greg.
Say it again. Say it again.
Say it again so everyone. Say it so the bartender can hear it. Say it so the valet can hear it.
When you get back to your place, make a phone call.
That's what we're going to do when we leave this room, Greg, and get our phones back. But right now, in this room, without our cell phones, without anything, make it happen. We just don't want to hear about it until it's done. Okay? Can you do that, lapdog? Thank you.
Which, by the way, because he's been very good at his job, is the first time you would hear about it.